Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to introduce to you a science fiction novelist and cybersecurity expert, and the novelist part came first, Guy-Philippe Goldstein. Guy-Philippe.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. And one of the hardest following act positions that I've ever put anyone through.
That's for sure. Thanks a lot for that, Rob. But again, let's all think about what's happening in Ukraine. And we're going to shift from actual war situation to kind of future war situation. So I'm Guy Goldstein. I'm a lecturer at the School of Economic Warfare in Paris. I'm also an advisor to PwC, to VC fund Expon Capital. And also I happen to write speculative fictions. And that may sound a little bit exotic for my French Cartesian friends, but I truly think it's a great tool to explore the most darkest territories where you have the biggest problems, and also perhaps where you'll find the biggest solutions. And sometimes they do happen to have impacts on real life. One of my novels, Babel Minute Zero, started in 1996 and finally published in 2007, that envisioned a conflict between China and the United States for the control of Taiwan, and taking place in large part in cyberspace. And to my surprise, it got a lot of traction among national security professionals in France, also in the US at MIT, and then a lot in Israel, up to the level of Prime Minister at the time, Bibi Netanyahu, that actually kind of talk about the impact of that book very recently in this following video, which will come.
In 2010, I think late 2010, I was approached by Professor Yitzhak Ben Israel. He's a former Army officer, Air Force officer who also served occasionally as a scientific advisor to prime ministers. And he said to me, I want you to read a novel. I said, I don't read novels. I read history, biographies, books on economics, technology, things like that. He said, no, you want to read this novel. And he gave me a book by a Jewish French writer by the name of Guy-Philippe Goldstein. It's called, what is it called? Babel? Babel.
Come on.
Minute Zero.
Thank you.
It was a fictional book about a future cyber war between the United States and China. To me, it didn't seem that fictional. And I read it. I called him the next morning. I said, I read the book. He said, you read the book? Yeah, I said all night, and I read this book. It's a novel, he said. No, it's not a novel. It's a description of coming reality. And I didn't sleep all night, not only because I read the book, but because I understood the implications for Israel, for any country. We couldn't be left defenseless in this developing world, in the cyber world. I gathered Professor Ben Israel and my former military secretary, General Locher, and I said, I want you to set up a steering committee to set up cyber defenses for Israel.
And then in 2011, the Israeli government took a much bigger bet in cyber for its national security. And perhaps the effects of this bet can still be seen today in the way Israel confronts some of its enemies. Yet, speculative fictions have drawbacks. They can be a little bit manipulative, perhaps. And also, they may predict the future, except that we don't know exactly when that future is going to happen. To it, Babel had made two predictions. One, that cyber would become very central to international relations, but also that it would get us into a much darker place. And to try to further detail that, I published an article in 2013 with the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, where I apply a Columbia University professor Robert Jervis' security dilemma model to a new type of categories or new type of weapons, cyber weapons. And indeed, If you have a weapon that seems to give the advantage to the offense, and that's the case with cyber, and if weapons capabilities can be used both for defense and offense, and with cyber it's computers and people, so yep, then you will end up in Jarvis' doubly dangerous world, the world most conducive to collapse, such as World War I. And actually, the late Professor Jarvis himself wrote a paper in 2020 where he applied his own model to that new category of weapons and ended up in about the same conclusions, that cyber would lead to a further destabilization of international relations. And yet, here we are in 2022, and we haven't seen such a big collapse from cyber, not even actually in the context of a war in Ukraine. So maybe were we a bit wrong? That's possible. Or did we predict a future that has not arrived yet? Well, to check that out, let's put on our hat of speculative analyst and let's take a leap 10, 15 years from now. What do we see? Well, first, a revolution that, to my surprise, very few people actually talk about, that of a full robotic world. As unit cost of industrial-grade robots is going to decline and collapse, we will be surrounded by smart autonomous machines. But then what used to be just a virtual shock is going to be turned into an actual physical shock, and it will not be just about loss of money, but about destruction and loss of people's lives. In addition, we will continue to see the extraordinary increase in computing power, perhaps by a factor of 1,000 in the next 10, 15 years, as we've seen over the last few decades. That means that the future drones and nanobots will be much smarter than they are today and able to achieve much more complex maneuvers, for example, hiding and then physically inserting malware into computing systems, which will prove once again that you cannot escape the grip of cyberspace. In addition to that, with AI, we'll have better avatars of ourselves with better audio-video imitations, deepfakes, and also natural language processing, and then, of course, better personality models. And these avatars will very probably succeed at the Turing test, the ability to speak to machine, believing that you're actually speaking to a human being. But then, those swarms of Turing avatars will swamp social networks and the future metaverses that we all talked about. And will be able to reach out in an industrial fashion any target on any professional circle or friend circles or romantic circles. And then apply sophisticated psychological effects in order to seduce, to anger, to destabilize, to coerce, and then to recruit. And then to do that by carpet bombing whole segments of population or by surgically striking at specific individuals in critical companies, leading to a collapse of trust in cyberspace and actually in society. And then, it's not over. With all the sensors on all the drones I mentioned, and with gazillions of additional low-cost sensors, we'll have millions, billions of data points that will help us to fashion better dynamic living digital twins models of factories, cities, even human organization, provided we have the right cognitive models. But the issue is that with these synthetic, transparent virtual worlds we'll build, it's going to be much easier for hackers to find the right vulnerabilities and then the right attack paths. And that will make cyber weapons way more operational. Going back again to Jarvis, so far it's been very hard to break big things with cyber. And actually we've seen a couple of ambitious nation states trying to do sabotage their cyber and actually often failing at it. And if you have a weapon that has a low probability of success, it may be of use for psychological effects, but it will not spearhead your military campaign. It will not be your dominant weaponry. But now, if you have, thanks to this virtual synthetic world, a much higher probability of success, then now you have a high-performing weapon, now you have a dominant weaponry, and now we're back to the doubly dangerous world. Okay, so what is going to happen? Well, people are going to react to that. How so? Well, for example, by changing paradigms. At the individual level, facing the Turing avatar, there will be no more implicit trust. If you see Guy-Philippe on the screen, well, you'll always authenticate and make sure that this is actually the guy that he's talking about, and have that with a smartphone or other connected devices on the side. And at the industrial level, because of a much higher cost entailed by destruction and endangering people's lives, actually there will be a change in order of magnitude in investment in security in the next 10, 15 years. There's a model for that. That's the airline business that actually invests a lot in security, in peoples and equipment, and actually they do still manage to make money. And then another thing not to forget, do not discard old tech. Yes, it's inefficient, but because some hackers do not think about that old tech, then it may be a nice recourse in case you have an issue. And that's actually the reason why the US Senate has commissioned an experiment in 2019 to maintain redundant old-style electromechanical systems on the US electrical grid, just in case something happens. In addition to that, facing the dark net where all the bad guys are cooperating, we'll have to muscle up our own bright net where all the good guys do cooperate. Why? Because the name of the game is to cycle information quicker than we can do it, to always be one step ahead of him. So we'll have need for better information sharing between nation states, but also with private entities. And why so? Because cyber warfare doesn't happen in vast plains where large armies are looking at each other. It happens where you have modern activities and value creation, that is, within administrations and companies. That is the battlefield. And that's why we'll need also to think more about the financial incentives so that private third parties do better cycling of that information. And finally, a little twist on the virtual synthetic world. Churchill used to say, sometimes the truth is so precious that she needs to be attended by a bodyguard of lies. So, with all the synthetic world, we'll be able to create deceptive systems so that we can have fake data and fake networks so that the hackers are going to waste time and energy fighting that. And even better than that, we'll be able to actually poison those data and those networks so that each time the hackers try to hack at you, it may backfire against him, and that may actually reverse the advantage from the offense to the defense. And that may be a game changer. Because indeed, if we put all that together, all these defensive elements, then we may switch back to where the defensive side is the dominant one, the doubly stable world, the world most conducive to peace and stability. And voila, you have a guy who in a 10-minute talk has managed to provide you some solutions to save the world. Like if it was true. I don't know, I mean, there'll be lots of different equilibrium to that. But what is very important, the main takeaway from all that, is that one, the cybersecurity environment is going to change tremendously in the next coming decades, and B, maybe national security leaders may take benefit to listen to imaginative voice to better understand all those changes. This has happened in the past. For example, Winston Churchill, the great national security leader of the 21st century, used to listen to many different voices, and though he was a conservative, he used to actually listen to a goddamn socialist writer, H.G. Wells, who was actually the first one to coin the expression the atom bomb in 1913, not from a general, not from a scientist. And because of these conversations and friendship, Churchill was the first one to speak about the danger of atomic weapons as early as in 1926 at the House of Commons. And closer to us, we have seen organizations such as, for example, the French Defense Innovation Agency, opening up to SciFi authors to think about future threats. And that's great, but what do you do when you don't have SciFi authors at disposal? So, of course, you can always hire them. But the other thing is that you can apply what I would call the Ratatouille doctrine from the Ratatouille Pixar movie. Thank you. Some amateurs here. And it comes from what French chief, Auguste Gusteau, would say, anyone can cook, and become a great chief, including a little rat. So how do you apply that to real life? Here's my recipe. 1, you pick up the most open-minded people in your organization. 2, you create a sandbox, a safe space with lots of creative scenarios. And 3, you mix all that stuff and let them explore imaginatively in the most creative ways. And that's what I've been trying to do in France with some sort of cyber strategic simulation stuff with French companies, where we play a company, the competitors, the national state regulators, the clients, and the hackers, and let executives explore freely. And also what I've been doing with the French Defense Innovation Agency and other partners for organizations within the French National Staff, General Staff, to explore new type of ways to wage wars in distant futures. To sum up, and to go back always to Winston Churchill, he stated in his Harrow Address of 1941 that you cannot tell from appearances of things to go. Sometimes imagination makes things out far worse than they are, yet without imagination, not much can be done. Churchill was the great victors, one of the great victors of World War II, because one of the things, he stayed the course in 1940, and he stayed the course because he had a great vision. But one thing which is often forgotten is that he had a great vision because he was a man of tremendous, tremendous imagination, a homo imaginarius, as would say Brian Collins. And that applies very well to the art of warfare, which, to go back to Sun Tzu, is based on deception, the ability to surprise your enemy, and also to cyber warfare, because that's that, and of course all the innovative stuff with IT. But all that means that in this 21st century, the key to national security actually may be this ability to transcend, to liberate ourselves from current state, and to be the first to move to the edge of a very peculiar, mysterious battlefront, to the edge of imagination. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. De rien. Thanks, Rob.
Again, I put you in a very difficult position.
Hard, but also very inspiring, you know.
You did a phenomenal job. I always have believed for some time that the role of all education, everything, is to help us navigate imagination.
Yes.
The reason is not to be more creative and all, that's great, but because all reality is created inside our brains and between our brains. And thus, all education is to help us navigate imagination, because imagination defines our realities.
And it helps to a very important use case, prediction.
Oui, bien sûr. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.